Between July 2024 and June 2025, nearly 3,000 people were kidnapped in Nigeria's northwest. That's more than 60% of every kidnapping recorded in the entire country. In Sokoto alone, 358 of those were taken from their homes, their farms, their schools. Now here's the part nobody is asking. On the same day Nigerians across the country were celebrating Eid-el-Fitr, praying for peace, visiting family, Governor Ahmed Aliyu of Sokoto State was sitting in the Sultan's palace, publicly declaring that Abuja and Sokoto are now working together to finally finish the bandits. The Sultan of Sokoto, the spiritual leader of over 70 million Muslims in Nigeria, blessed the alliance publicly. The federal government is backing it. The budget is there. The troops are there. The airstrikes have already happened. So the question I want you to hold in your mind for the next 20 minutes is this. If everything is finally in place, the money, the alliance, the military, why is Sokoto still burning? Stay with me, because the answer changes everything you think you know about security in northern Nigeria. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Niger Newsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me because this one gets interesting. So let's establish what actually happened because the headlines are only telling you half the story. On Friday, March 21, 2026, Eid-el-Fitr, Governor Ahmed Aliyu of Sokoto State paid the traditional Salah homage to the Sultan of Sokoto, Muhammad Saad Abubakar, at his palace. This is a ceremonial event, but in northern Nigerian politics, what is said at the Sultan's palace carries enormous weight. It is a public declaration witnessed by one of the most influential traditional rulers on the continent. At that meeting, Governor Aliyu made three key statements that you need to hear clearly. First, he said the federal government and Sokoto State are now working in direct synergy to end insecurity. Not general cooperation, synergy. That's a very specific word. Second, he confirmed that his government has been providing logistical and financial support to conventional security agencies and to the State Community Guard Corps, which is essentially a state-funded civilian militia set up specifically to complement the military in intelligence gathering. Third, he called on residents to continue providing information to security agencies. That is not an idle request. That is an admission that intelligence, not just firepower, is the missing link in this war on banditry. Now here's the context you need to understand why this moment matters beyond Eid pleasantries. Sokoto State has been under sustained bandit attack for over a decade, but the nature of that threat has changed dramatically. What began as cattle rustling and highway robbery has now morphed into something far more dangerous: armed groups with terrorist links, cross-border networks, and in some communities, outright parallel governance. Bandits are collecting taxes, appointing village heads, and in some areas, farmers cannot access their own land without paying a levy. We're not talking about petty crime, we're talking about a shadow state operating inside a Nigerian state. And that is the fire that Gov Aliyu is now publicly pledging alongside Abuja to put out. Let's talk about the structure of this fight, because understanding who has what power is critical to understanding why this problem has lasted so long. Under the Nigerian constitution, internal security is a concurrent responsibility, meaning both federal and state governments have roles to play. But here's where it gets complicated. The police, the military, the DSS, all of these are federal institutions. A state governor cannot command them directly. They can request, they can support, but they cannot order. So what Sokoto has done is build its own layer, the Community Guard Corps. This is a state-funded body operating at the local level whose primary job is intelligence gathering. The idea is that local guards know the terrain, speak the language, and can pick up information that a soldier from Lagos or Abuja simply cannot. Now, from Abuja's side, the federal government has deployed Operation Fansanyama, which translates roughly to Rescue the West. This is the primary military campaign covering Sokoto, Zamfara, Katsina, Kebbi, and Niger State.
Its mandate: neutralize bandit networks, destroy hideouts, rescue hostages. In December 2025, something extraordinary happened. The United States military, with President Tinubu's approval, conducted airstrikes on suspected Islamist-linked targets in northwestern Sokoto.
Now, here's the thing that most commentators are missing. And this is exactly why I said, stay with me. Governor Aliyu made this declaration on Eid Day at the Sultan's palace, not in a press conference, not in a security briefing, not at the National Assembly, at the Sultan's palace. That is deliberate. In northern Nigerian politics, the Sultan of Sokoto is not just a religious leader. He is the single most important symbol of legitimacy for the Muslim North. His endorsement, even implicit endorsement through presence and a positive response, is political currency that no amount of press releases can buy. The Sultan publicly told Aliyu, "Do not relent. The Sultanate Council is fully behind you." That statement does three things at once. It gives Governor Aliyu domestic legitimacy with the traditional establishment. It signals to Abuja that Sokoto's political class is aligned with the federal agenda on security, and it sends a message to the bandits that the highest religious authority in the north is not sheltering them. Now, let's talk about who benefits from this alliance and who stands to lose. Who benefits? Governor Aliyu benefits politically. Sokoto is approaching a period where his administration's legacy will be assessed. Security is the defining issue. If banditry visibly reduces, even partially, before 2027 election cycles begin to heat up, he consolidates his base and strengthens his hand within the APC structure in the northwest. President Tinubu benefits nationally. His administration has faced sustained criticism on security. A visible FG-state collaboration that produces results in one of the most troubled states in the country gives his government a credible security narrative going into the next election. The Sultan benefits institutionally. The traditional institution of the Sultanate has at times been seen as losing relevance in a modern security context. Publicly endorsing and being seen as a partner in the peace process restores and reinforces that relevance. Who stands to lose or feels the pressure? This is where it gets interesting. Former Minister of State for Defense, Bello Matawalle, who hails from Zamfara, Sokoto's neighbor and arguably the epicenter of the banditry crisis, has faced scrutiny and allegations regarding his relationship with bandit leaders during his time as Zamfara governor. The DWI, a civil society body, has been pushing for independent probes into those allegations. A successful Sokoto security model under Aliyu could implicitly become a benchmark that exposes the failures and possible complicity of neighboring state responses in the past.
I'll come back to the Lakurawa connection in Section 6, because that is where the international dimension flips everything we've discussed so far. The silent players. Let's not ignore the community-level actors. Village heads, district heads, and local farmers' unions in Sokoto are the people who ultimately decide whether intelligence flows to security agencies or stays buried in fear. The governor is asking them to cooperate, but cooperation requires trust, and trust requires that when people provide information, they do not get killed in retaliation. That feedback loop is exactly where previous security initiatives in the Northwest have collapsed. The bandit networks know this. They have, in multiple communities, explicitly threatened reprisals against anyone who speaks to government forces. So the governor's call for public cooperation is not just a political statement. It is a test of whether the state can actually protect its informants. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Zoom out with me for a moment. Because what is happening in Sokoto is not a Sokoto problem. It is a national problem wearing a Sokoto face. The Northwest Geopolitical Zone, Sokoto, Zamfara, Katsina, Kebbi, Jigawa, Kano, is Nigeria's most populous zone. It also has some of the country's lowest per capita income, highest rates of out-of-school children, and now the highest kidnapping rates in the nation. Agriculture in this zone has been devastated. Researchers found that in Kaduna, 30% of farmland had been abandoned due to banditry by 2020. In Zamfara and Katsina, local food production dropped by as much as 60%. That translates directly into food insecurity, and Sokoto, Zamfara, and Katsina had nearly 2.6 million people facing food insecurity in 2021, with projections that it would double. Now think about what that means for Nigeria's food import bill, for inflation, for rural poverty, and ultimately for national political stability. The FG Sokoto alliance is not just about shooting bandits. It is, whether the government will say so or not, about whether the Nigerian state can demonstrate that it is capable of governing its own territory. If Sokoto succeeds, it becomes a model. If it fails, it confirms what many northern Nigerians already quietly believe, that the state has either lost control or made its peace with the situation. There is also a federal-state power dynamic to watch. Governor Aliyu is carefully positioning Sokoto as a cooperative partner, not a failed state demanding federal rescue. That positioning matters for revenue allocation, federal project siting, and political capital in Abuja. Let me now bring back the Lakurawa connection I flagged earlier, because this is where the story stops being a typical Nigerian security story and becomes something with global implications. Lakurawa is a group that began in 2017 in Sokoto State, originally welcomed by rural communities as a vigilante force against banditry. By 2025, it had transformed into something far more dangerous, a crime-terror hybrid with direct links to both the Islamic State Sahel Province and Islamic State West Africa Province. Analysts at the Sufan Center, one of the world's leading terrorism research organizations, have described Lakurawa as the connective tissue between ISSP and ISWAP, helping them link their operational zones through central Niger and northwest Nigeria. The group extorts communities while framing it as religiously mandated taxation. It runs parallel governance, and it has been actively recruiting. On Christmas Day 2025, U.S. military forces, with Tinubu's authorization, struck Lakurawa camps in Sokoto State. Despite those strikes, attacks continue to escalate. Here is the contradiction that nobody in the Nigerian political space is engaging with honestly. If Lakurawa is an affiliate of the Islamic State, not just bandits, but an internationally designated terrorist network, then this is no longer just a law enforcement or even military problem. It is a counter-terrorism problem with diplomatic, intelligence sharing, and foreign policy dimensions. The Americans don't.
Let me address the strongest arguments being made on the other side, because this channel doesn't do one-sided takes. Misconception 1. This is just politics, a governor talking on Eid Day and nothing will happen. That is too cynical, and it ignores the concrete steps already taken. Sokoto's 2026 budget allocates over 45 billion naira to the security sector for patrol vehicles, equipment, motorcycles, and logistics. That is not rhetoric. That is real money, committed in a budget that has already been presented to the Sokoto House of Assembly. The Community Guard Corps is operational. Operation Fansanyama is active. The US has already struck once. The infrastructure is in place. Misconception 2. The military solution is the only solution, or military operations alone will end banditry. This one actually has truth on both sides. Military operations are necessary. You cannot negotiate your way out of an active insurgency without first establishing a credible force posture. But the history of banditry in Sokoto and Zamfara shows clearly that purely military approaches have repeatedly achieved tactical gains without strategic victory. Peace agreements signed in 2019 reduced violence, then attacks resumed in 2020. The deeper drivers, poverty, land grievances,
porous borders with Niger Republic remain unaddressed. The 45 billion naira security allocation is significant, but Sokoto's health budget is 122 billion naira. The question is whether those investments in health, education, and infrastructure will follow through, because ultimately, young men join bandit groups because the alternative, a legitimate economic life, has been made impossible in their communities. Misconception 3. The Sultan's endorsement means the religious establishment is fully aligned with the security response. The Sultan's public statement is supportive, but it is carefully worded. He commended the governor and urged prayers. He did not notably issue a religious decree against banditry or call on clerics to publicly mobilize communities against bandit networks. There is a difference between institutional blessing and active mobilization. The FG and Sokoto need the latter. So what happens next? Here is my analysis, and these are the signals you want to watch. Most likely next moves. Governor Aliyu will continue to escalate the public communication strategy, more visits to traditional rulers, more joint security briefings with federal agencies. Watch for whether this translates into actual ground-level changes. Are bandit attacks in Isa, Sabombini, and Tangaza local governments decreasing? Are internally displaced persons returning to their communities? Those are the ground-level metrics that matter. From Abuja, watch whether Tinubu's administration follows the U.S. airstrikes with any formal counterterrorism designation for Lakurawa. If Nigeria officially designates Lakurawa as a terrorist organization separate from generic banditry, it changes the legal and operational framework for how security agencies pursue them. It also opens the door to more formal international intelligence cooperation. Signals that things are escalating, the warning signs. Watch the Bagaja-Isa LGA corridor on the Sokoto-Zamfara border. That area has seen repeated infiltration attempts that security forces have been repelling for weeks. If that line breaks, it signals the bandits are reconstituting after the December airstrikes. Also watch whether misinformation campaigns on social media about Sokoto attacks intensify. That has historically been a tactic used to destabilize community trust and undermine security operations. Best case scenario. The FG-Sokoto alliance produces a sustained intelligence-led campaign that degrades Lakurawa's operational capacity, disrupts cross-border supply lines, and restores enough stability for displaced farmers to return to their land. The political will hold through 2027. The Sultan's moral authority is actively mobilized. Clerics preach against banditry, community leaders facilitate information flow, and the state can actually protect its informants. Worst-case scenario. The December U.S. airstrikes and current military pressure push Lakurawa and associated groups deeper into Kebbi State and across the Niger border, where they reconsolidate and return with greater capability. Political dynamics, especially approaching 2027, fracture the FG-Sokoto alliance as Abuja attention shifts to electoral calculations. The 45 billion naira security budget is allocated, but procurement delays mean the equipment never reaches the front line in time. And the intelligence gap, which remains the single biggest weakness, is never effectively closed because informants remain unprotected. Long-term structural question. Nigeria has not resolved the porous border with Niger Republic. Multiple unidentified crossing points around Ilela in Sokoto allow bandits to commit attacks and retreat across the border before Nigerian security forces can respond.